Guitarristas, no sabéis lo contento que estoy hoy aquí en la oficina de guitarristas. Y es que tenemos con nosotros a uno de los guitarristas más inspiradores que hay. Su legato es famoso, su afinación por cuartas también. Estoy hablando de Tom Quayle. Tom, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me here.
No, I'm so happy to have you here because I believe you're such an influential guitar player, not only music-wise, but also in the business side. We'll talk about later.
Cool, cool.
Tom, I think these days you're talking about a new product. What is it?
It's this, the Ironheart Loudpedal from Laney. This is a collaboration from sort of the last year and a half to 2 years that we've been working on. Came out a couple of months ago and it's been doing really well, so really happy with it. So I can tell you whatever you like to know about it.
I knew about the Lionheart because it was existing amp on the market.
Yep.
How much of it does it, conserve the sound or?
Well, that was the whole point of it. So I think it was 2 years ago, Laney released the Loudpedal, which was a small version of the Ironheart amplifier. It was a lot smaller than this. And it was a full 60-watt amp that preserved the vast majority of the tube tone from the Ironheart amplifier. And I plugged into it down at their headquarters in Birmingham in the UK, and I was absolutely blown away by it. So at that time, this product wasn't even, they hadn't even thought of doing this. So I said to them, you know, the Lionheart's such an amazing amplifier and people use it as a pedal platform. So you can see here I'm using pedals with this amp. And that's always been my setup. I've always used the dual fusion from Wampler into a Lionheart. So I said, how cool would it be if you could make a Lionheart loud pedal that sounds like 99% the same as the original tube amplifier, and I can stick it on a board and have my pedals plugged into the front. And actually, they've got insanely close. Like, wow. It's kind of crazy.
So is it, how much watts does it have?
60.
60.
It's loud as hell. It's insane. really crazy loud. It's unbelievable.
So in a very energetic drummer situation, it delivers.
Absolutely. So the way I've been running this, I mean, I was in Nashville recently at Andy Wood's Woodshed Guitar Camp, and, you know, that is a loud gig. Everybody's using 4x12s. I used an LA 212 2x12 cab, which is an oversized 2x12 cab that Laney make, a passive cab. Just used the speaker out on this, and I had no problem competing with the rest of the band. And the volume was only about halfway up. So it's crazy loud. Obviously can't demonstrate that here because we're not plugged into cabs, but it is, I mean, honestly, you could play any gig with this, and if you need to be louder, obviously you can mic the cab up as normal, as you would do with a normal amp, or you've got the XLR out, which is what we're running, that could go to front of house and through the PA, or wedges on stage. So it's very versatile in that respect. But as far as the feel of it goes, being a solid state amp, because there's no tubes in this thing, I should point out as well, there's no digital modeling. This is all analog circuitry. Okay. The only digital thing is on the XLR out, there's an impulse response, which is how we're recording. That obviously has analog to digital conversion, but within the signal chain of the amp, out through the speaker out and the effects loop, there is no digital conversion at all. Wow. So the feel is amazing. Laney have an amazing history with Class D power amps. So anybody out there who knows about amps will know that the Lionheart has a Class A amplifier. So the power amp stage is Class A, and that's known for kind of like a chimey, kind of, I shouldn't use this term, but Fender-y kind of sound. It's got that chimey vintage sound. And feel, well, Class D, most guitar players don't like because they associate it with kind of stiffness and kind of too much immediacy. But Laney have been using Class D power amps for a long time in a lot of their products. So like the Ironheart SLS that they've got, the little kind of rack mount amp, has a beautiful Class D power amp that does not feel like a Class D power amp at all. It doesn't have any of that stiffness. It sags in a nice way. It's got this beautiful touch response. Well, I'll show you that shortly. And this is exactly the same. So I actually blind test A/B'd this with a friend of mine when we were developing it. So this is a collaborative product. We've worked together on this, Laney and I. And he uses Lionhearts for his function band all the time. So he's just a dude who goes out and plays regular gigs with the Lionheart. And I have an amp switcher at home, and without showing him this when it was in production, I switched between the real Lionheart and this, and he was like, right, and I can't, what are you showing me? I can't tell the difference. He couldn't tell when I was switching. So it's pretty clever. And they've even got like all the features of the original amp. One of the biggest features was the tone control. So the tone control, you've got your standard bass, mid and treble, your 3-band EQ, same as the original amp. You've got the reverb from the original amplifier as well, although it's slightly modified, it's a spring reverb. And then we've got this tone control. And the tone control basically was like a master EQ that also affected the way the amp felt. So there's some compression and stuff going on in the power stage. And Laney, to their credit, I said to them, can we get the tone control on there? And they said, no, it's too complicated. It's after the power stage. It's too complicated to do. Well, they found a way of doing it. So it really is just like the original amplifier. But there's some modifications on there as well. So you've got 2 channels. Unlike the original amp, which had a 2-channel structure where channel 2 was like a higher gain channel. These are identical, and you can set them up however you like. So I have channel 2 running as my clean channel with the pedals in front, and channel 1 is like a boosted, overdriven, kind of slightly vintagey gain sound. But you could do whatever you wanted to, and they've both got these bright switches on, so you can go from bright to normal to dark. And I run the gain channel in the dark mode, and unlike the original amp, I actually run the Lionheart Loudpedal with the bright switch on for the pedals because I like the way it feels. And other than that, the only other things to mention, we've got 3 foot switches on here, 1 for reverb, for the spring, reverb, 1 to switch channels, and the boost as well, to turn the boost on, which is not on the original amp. This is taken from the Cub amplifier, which is a fantastic pre-gain boost for lots more distortion, and I'm MIDI switching everything.
Okay, because I see it's MIDI switchable, so you rarely push these buttons, I guess.
Never.
Okay.
So I gave you a hard time trying to plug this cable in because my MIDI cables are on here, but next to the XLR you've got MIDI in and through, and then this little Hotone switcher down here is doing all of my switching of everything, so you can see there it's switching to channel 1 and switching the boost on, and then I'm going back to channel 2, and I'm also switching. I have a Boss GT1000 core here, which is only there for effects.
Okay.
I'm not using any impulse responses on modeling. It's just delay and reverb, and then occasionally I can stick a vibrato on or whatever from there if I want to. And again, that can be all MIDI switched if I want to. And then the Dual Fusion runs in the front, and then the Ego 76 compressor is also running in the front too. So
okay, and I believe the Dual Fusion has ins and outs for each section separately.
It does. So what I could do if I wanted to is have a bigger board, which would have everything in loops, like a Gig Rig G2 or a Gig Rig G3, which is what I do on my bigger board. But for this travel board, I've just got everything. I've go into channel 1 and out of channel 2, and they're running in series. But I'm switching this in and out with the Boss GT1000 core because this has effects loops on of its own.
Okay.
So actually this is a really flexible rig, and to be able to travel with an amplifier that's a 60 watt amp, and by the way, this thing is built so well, it's insane. It's made in the UK as well, so it's like, you know, really good quality components, really well built. So it's solid as a rock. It's nothing's going to happen to it. So it's an amazing travel rig. The only thing to bear in mind with a rig like this is because it's a 60 watt amplifier, you can't use like a standard 9 volt power supply or a 12 volt power supply.
Okay.
It's a 24 volt power supply. So what I've done is I've just attached the power supply on top of the board. You normally would put it underneath. I just put it on top because of easy access here, and I can see if there's any issues as I'm traveling around, making sure it's working. But that's the only thing you would need to do. That lives permanently on your board, and you have 2, I guess, IEC cables.
And I'm assuming if we looked enough, we would find something like a Strymon or something that has a 24 output in
This
some
is the
way.
thing. So I've got a Chox DC7 on the bottom, and it does actually have a 24 volt output, but I'm too scared to try it at this point.
All right.
I think we need, because they have a custom cable and it's meant for connecting 2 power supplies, but it sends 24 volt DC. So
yeah,
it
but
should
who knows
work.
what would happen if
Who
we
knows?
use it the
So
wrong
I'm sticking
way.
with this at the moment, and all it means, as I say, is that you end up with another IEC cable on your board. So you have 2 of these instead of 1, and that's it basically. So it's an amazing, compact, really useful rig that's very versatile.
I'm curious about something perhaps a little bit technical, but I'd love to ask you about it. How do you organize your presets? Are you a person who has like one layout and you just work with what you have here, or are you like a song-based player? You go one song, one bank.
So I don't have, basically I use 3 sounds.
Okay.
For everything.
Okay.
And then I ride the volume control on the guitar. In fact, recently I've been using much lower output pickups for that reason, so that you can actually ride the volume control on the guitar and you've got more dynamic range that way. So I just use a clean tone, which is the first sound on the board. It switches the dual fusion out, and I'm using the clean channel. What I've set up as clean channel on here, which is channel 2. Again, you could use either channel. And that sound, again, you're listening to impulse responses, not mic'd up here. But that gives me a very, very clean, dynamically responsive sound. Now that then has the delay and reverb on there, and that's my sound for cleans, basically. From there, when I go to this second sound here, that's actually the drive what I've got set up as the drive channel on the Lionheart with the boost engaged. So if I take the boost out, I can do that manually here, or I could do it via MIDI. That's the crunch sound on the bridge pickup. With the boost engaged, which is not on the original amp, so that's sound 2, and then sound 3, which is my core sound, is the Wampler Dual Fusion with the Ego 76 in front through the same clean channel on here. And this gives me, I'm going to switch to position 4 because we do have noise in the studio, so I'm going to switch to position 4 here. And again, this gives me a very dynamic kind of crunchy, this is my main sort of lead tone really. And I've stopped using a lot of gain. I'm using way less gain these days. So for the legato, that kind of thing, it gives me a lot of dynamics. I'm not using too much saturation. And then when I want to play cleaner, if I just back off, and if I need more, I can switch channel 2 in on the Dual Fusion, which I can just do manually here. Obviously, if you had a switching system like the Gig Rig G2, you could do that via the G2 or G3. And then up to the bridge position. And that's basically it. Now, the only other sound I have on here, which is why I've only got a 4-button foot switch, that's the 3 core sounds. If I go to 4, I've got that kind of cheesy classic.
But I love
it. Because I'm an 80s child. I was born in the 80s, so it's like I need that kind of cheesy chorus thing. The number of times I realistically use it is pretty much 0.
But you're happy knowing that you have it.
I'm happy knowing it's there. Exactly. And again, that chorus is just coming from the GT1000 Core. And the only reason I use the GT1000 Core is because it's so small. So you've got the flexibility. If something does go horribly wrong, I then can switch over to this and use, you know, the outs on that and use the amp modeling or whatever I need to. So it's redundancy basically. Other than that, it just gets used for a couple of effects.
Okay, so it doubles as a backup, actually.
Yes.
All right.
Exactly, yeah.
I have to say that being here and listening to the guitar itself, I don't mean the amplified sound. The legato of Tom Quayle sounds exactly like you hear at home. Because some might think, the compressor is helping. No, guys, it's his technique. And speaking of which, there's so many things that one can love about your technique, but definitely there's 2 things that impress me the most. One is the legato, and the other one is the fourths tuning. Let's talk about the first one.
Sure.
When did you start to practice legato? Because it's a long path to get that sound as clear and strong.
Well, it's a very different path as well to the original technical path I took when I was younger. So I started playing when I was 15. And I practiced a lot. I was the cliche of like 7 hours a day practicing, you know, doing all of my kind of, all the John Petrucci exercises, all that stuff. So I worked a lot on my technique, but I didn't work on it properly. I didn't have a teacher. So I developed lots of bad habits. So my picking technique is, it's fast and accurate, but only in certain scenarios. So I can only change strings with an upstroke. I can't change to a new string with a downstroke. I need to watch Troy Grady's stuff and all of these guys to figure out how to do this properly. But because I didn't think about my practice, I just kind of went with my instincts. I never had lessons. I developed all these bad habits. But I didn't do that with my legato techniques necessarily, because what I practiced at the time was just speed with legato. So I would sit and do this kind of, oh, let me go back to this sound. And that was all I did. I just wanted speed. Then I went and did a jazz degree. And I did 3 years of studying jazz and looking at time feel and looking at how to practice properly and being more mature with my practice. And I graduated in 2002 because I'm getting old now. And around 2006, I was so frustrated with my technique because of my picking technique. Every gig I ever did, I'd come off like, I was really annoyed with my playing. So I had a fundamental shift in my playing and I went back to legato technique. And because I was more mature with my practice, I knew how to practice properly. I started working on this technique and I was much more relaxed and I had my time feel down. So I was thinking about, you know, subdivisions. So as opposed to just playing as fast as possible, I would actually sit and think, you know, if I had dagga, 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 da, those are my subdivisions. And that's all legato technique, but with those subdivisions in mind, which is not how I practiced it before. I just practiced for speed.
Yeah.
I was doing all this kind of... Well, I can't do it anymore, but that Joe Satriani-esque legato. Whereas this now was more like a horn player, more like Alan Holdsworth or more like Brett Garsed or Greg Howe. So that then developed over the course of from 2006 to about 2008. I was lucky enough to I taught guitar for a living for Yamaha, and I was just practicing all the time. I wasn't teaching, I was practicing my legato technique. And you can see it on YouTube. In the very early days of YouTube, around 2007, there's a bunch of videos that I uploaded when video production wasn't a thing. You just had a MacBook with a 480p webcam staring at you and no one cared. I would sit and just practice, and you can see some of those videos. I start the legato lines and they fall apart. I can't finish them. And it just took a long time to develop the vocabulary and the phrasing and the fretboard knowledge in that style.
Is it a matter of thinking forward?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't play chess, you know, the game chess.
Yeah.
I don't play it, but I've been told that people think 4 or 5, maybe more moves ahead.
Right.
So you're strategizing. So I'm not doing that now, but at the time, that's what I had to do. I had to think about where I wanted to go on the fretboard and how I would get there and different pathways. And I've now developed the ability to improvise these lines. They're never the same twice, but they're similar, but they're never exactly the same. You know, doing this through different chord changes, so doing this through jazz standards and doing it through fusion progressions and so on and so forth. The challenges of that I found quite addictive, like a puzzle, like Sudoku, you know this puzzle?
Yes, Sudoku.
Yeah. So like a puzzle that I wanted to solve, so I could sit and do it for hours obsessively. It's quite sad, really. And then I think Netflix came out, and then I was like, okay, I'll watch Netflix and just do this for hours, you know, thinking about...
So you're of those who do a distractive...
Yes.
They say it's a good technique for improving...
Yeah, because you're exercising the subconscious brain as well as the conscious brain. So I wouldn't do it at first because I need to know where my fingers are going and I need to build those pathways. But once the pathways are in there, like I will sit for, I used to anyway, sorry about the noise. I sit for hours just talking to somebody, having a conversation with you, just doing this. So we can talk while I'm doing this. And it's like, you know, basically I'm not thinking about what my fingers are doing. I'm thinking about what I'm saying to you. And therefore the pathways are kind of becoming subconscious. And if they're subconscious, it means that by the time I have to actually play music, I'm not thinking about that anymore. The technique, that is. I'm thinking about the music and not so much about what my fingers are doing. So yeah, but I wasn't having a conversation, I was watching Netflix and you know, watching a box set of something or whatever. So that was the idea.
And you mentioned something like, I was more mature at that time and I practiced differently.
Yeah.
What you were thinking of?
So the tension in the hand, the actual subdivisions specifically, the time feel, but mostly about consistency. So with my right hand, when I was practicing when I was younger, what would happen is I would just go for speed, and I didn't think about the muscles and the mechanics. I never had any pain or anything, but I developed when I changed strings with a downstroke, I developed a flick of my wrist, and I didn't know why. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know I was doing a flick of the wrist. But having analysed that afterwards, now as I cross strings, so again, for me, there's a frustration now where I can pick fast. I'm not that tense when I do this. It's not comfortable, but I'm not that tense. But if I start with a downstroke, it's horrendous. This is as fast as I can go.
I understand.
And I'm starting to solve this problem. I know how to solve this problem, but because I didn't practice properly when I was younger, I wasn't thinking about the muscle movements or, you know, the direction of the pick or what was happening with my hand. I just went for raw speed. Because I couldn't do it starting with a downstroke, I just compensated by starting with an upstroke and therefore built in a problem into my technique that I now have a struggle to solve. Whereas with the legato, I was conscious of what problems might happen and keeping the muscles relaxed and not building in too much tension. So one example of that might be, there's a thing when people play legato, they worry their notes are too quiet, which is correct. You know, if you play really quietly, no one's going to hear what you're doing and the note doesn't sound good. But I didn't worry about note volume at first. I worried about consistency of finger placement and not building in too much tension. Because if you build in too much tension into the hand at first, you can't get rid of it later. But if you build consistency of technique and then you add in the tension slowly to get the note volume afterwards, you get just the right amount of tension. You don't build in too much. Whereas in my right hand, I built way too much tension in straight away. And it's like, that's given me a lifetime of problems now.
Yeah.
So that's the difference basically between the two techniques. And that's why I can express myself properly with legato, but not as a picker, you know.
By the way, are you a lefty or a right-handed?
I'm actually a right-handed. My dad is left-handed and plays guitar extraordinarily well. My dad is an incredible guitar player. But yeah, I'm a right-hand player.
Some might ask, why are you asking him that? You can see clearly that he is right-handed. Not always a left-handed player plays a lefty guitar.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So my dad plays a right-handed guitar as normal guitar, which means his left hand, because he's left-handed, is extremely dexterous at moving around. But my dad is a fingerstyle guitar player. And if he tries to play with a pick, it's a nightmare for him. And I wonder if that's got something to do with his right hand being less dominant, you know, I don't know. But
so you went to your father and tell him, this is your fault. And
yeah, exactly.
The big thing is your fault.
Thank you very much, Dad. Yeah, that's great. I should have thought of that earlier. Yeah. That's a good one.
You have an app, Solo.
Yes, I do.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so that was a lockdown project. A lot of people had lockdown projects in COVID. I had an idea, because of the way I visualize the guitar, I think about how every single note I play relates to the chord's root note or to the scale's root note. And I think about it by its function. So is it the third or the fifth or the seventh, for example? And the way I visualize it is I relate it visually to that root note. So I'm trying to find, okay, if I have a C major 7 or C major 9 chord, how does the third look against the root note in every octave? And in my tuning, because I'm tuning fourths, so I have a C and an F, when I look at that major third relationship, or that third relationship, it's the same everywhere, all over the guitar. In standard tuning, you have to compensate for the tuning slightly. So the app is designed to enable people to practice this system of always being aware how every single note they play relates to the root note of the chord or scale they're improvising or visualizing against. And so we put this app together over the course of about a year, 2020, in lockdown. And it came out January 2021. And it's been really amazingly successful. We have tens of thousands of people using this app now all over the world. So yeah, it's become a business that I have to take quite seriously now. It wasn't expected, but that's the way it's gone.
How long does it take for people to understand this new tuning? Because I'm assuming they are not new guitar players. They have been playing for a while, and they have to adapt to a new whole world.
Yeah, I mean, the tuning has caused some problems along the way, because I switched in 1999, so it's a long time, and I don't play in standard tuning. I can play basic chords and minor pentatonic scales.
Yeah, but the brain is so wired to...
Yeah, and it's crazy how much of a difference a single semitone tuned up or down makes on the guitar to how the whole system just changes. So it has given some interesting problems along the way. So for instance, when I used to teach for Lick Library back in the day, I did a Steely Dan DVD where I was teaching 7 Steely Dan songs. And I had the worst headache by the end of this session, because I had to do everything in standard tuning. And for me, this is a G.
Of course.
For you, this is a G. Yeah. And for me to keep saying, you know, that I had to like figure out on the fly what all the notes were on the top 2 strings. And again, teaching for Yamaha, I had to teach the kids how to play in standard tuning. Across the years, I don't do any private teaching anymore. I used to do lots. And I'd have to really think hard when I was teaching, especially when it came to teaching people to read notation, to read music. But along the years, I've found ways of dealing with it. So like, I'll teach people things on the bottom 4 strings, and then I can adjust them in real time in my head on the top, on the middle and the top 4 strings. And I'll always make sure that if I ever do anything, it's transcribed in standard tuning as well. So I have a guy called Levi Clay, who's quite well known now in the transcription world, who transcribes everything for me in standard tuning, but makes sure it's playable, which is really important, because there's a lot of things in this tuning that you can't play in standard tuning. The fingerings are impossible. Yeah. One example would be if I was going to play like a G, like this little shape. When I get to the G and the B string, or my C string, I can roll my first finger. Because you can do that here. Well, you can't do that in standard tuning, and this line becomes unplayable. So you have to find another way of fingering it. So I rely on somebody else who knows standard tuning very well to figure out fingerings that work. But generally it's fine. I mean, the app does not rely on 4th tuning. You can use the app in any tuning. And in fact, we allow you to select whatever tuning you are using, and the app will adjust to your tuning. Even if you're a bass player, if you're a 6-string bass player or a 4-string bass player, whatever. you can adjust that, and all the fretboard diagrams update to be for whatever tuning you're in. So it's not meant for fourths tuning. The only reason fourths tuning is more useful in some regards is because the shapes never change. But I would thoroughly recommend that anybody out there does not change to this tuning because you lose so much of guitar's repertoire. So if you are playing in function bands or cover bands, if you're playing, you know, like you only have to take, sorry about this, it's going to sound awful, but all of that is gone, like all of your open string chords, your bar chords, they're all gone as well. But you gain a lot in terms of improvisation because that consistency is there. So the guitar becomes symmetrical. So whenever you visualize something on the guitar, it's the same everywhere, no matter what octave you're in, what key you're in, whatever. It's like the ultimate transposing instrument at this point. And bass players figured this out years ago. They tune, if you have a 6-string bass, it's tuned in fourths. A 5-string bass with, if you have a low B, that's all in fourths. If you have a high C, that's all in fourths.
Right.
So, you know, bass players knew what the kick was straight away. Guitar players are still catching up.
The good thing is not such a different tuning so that you have to change gauge or you have to...
Absolutely.
You can have a backup pretty easily just by...
This is it. So the only issue you would ever find is if you've got not this kind of bridge necessarily, but if you've got like a Floyd Rose or something, it's really going to adjust you know, you're going to need to adjust for the tuning. But with this guitar, even with 3 springs in the back, if I change, it's not the end of the world. The only thing that people will find if they do want to check this out, I use 10 to 46, and you will find there is a significant amount more tension. Not enough to change gauge, as you said, but when you're bending, you do feel that extra tension in the C and the F string, basically, if you're used to standard tuning. Other than that, experiment with it. See, have another guitar, experiment with that, see what you think, because if you only use that guitar to improvise with now and again, you might find it works for you, especially if you're somebody who wants to, you know, you're an improvising musician or a jazz musician and you want your own sound. The vocabulary you'll develop will be slightly different to those guys in standard tuning, which is what's happened to me as well. So yeah.
I'm going to ask you something uncomfortable, but just for people to see what you mean by different tuning. Could you please play something that everyone knows, like Sweet Child of Mine, with your tuning?
So if you went, you mean play it properly or play it in the tuning?
Let's do both.
So if you did Sweet Child of Mine would be... But you can. You know, you can do it. It's not impossible. Like probably the easiest example for people to see is if you play a minor pentatonic scale. That's such a fixed, familiar shape in guitar players' minds, where that first finger goes across. We'll do it in A minor because that's the classic key. It goes across that 5th fret all the way down. So you would do this. Now for me, if I continue, obviously, so now I need to go back. But all those classic, they're all still available to you. What's not available to you is, say for instance, you know the song All Right Now by Free? Well, you can't do this. There is actually no good way of playing that because of the nature of this movement, this physical movement. So all that funk stuff, it's gone, all of that stuff. You have to find other ways of playing some of that material. And again, the bar chords, but where there's compromise on one side, there's advantages on the other side. And there are some beautiful chord voicings like this one that you can't play. There is no way of playing that in standard tuning. So there are advantages and disadvantages on both sides. Absolutely. The biggest advantage, as I say, is visualizing the fretboard and seeing and hearing your way through harmony much more quickly than you would in standard tuning. Before
you mentioned something like 11 years ago, I was on a Mac doing videos and stuff. For me, you're not just an excellent player, but also you represent a generation of guitar players that had to make their way through the internet, probably for the first time.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself as that? And how is it? How is the experience of facing this new technology?
Yeah, I mean, I do see myself and a few of the other guitar players from my generation. So, you know, Rick Graham, Andy Wood, Martin Miller, who sadly can't be with us today because he didn't miss his flight. The airline changed his flight and he couldn't make it. A lot of those guys from that generation, those guitar players who are entering our 40s or are in our mid-40s now, around that mid-2000 period, 2006 to 2010, we did become the first guitar players to kind of navigate the internet and YouTube and at the time MySpace and Facebook, so on and so forth, and use that online marketing to promote ourselves and sell products and so on and so forth. And the landscape changed completely. So we went from, like I said, having a white clamshell MacBook with a 480p horrible webcam on and nobody cared, to getting really into video production. And I remember along each sort of stage of the process, there were times when the technology became suddenly affordable. So when I first started working for Lig Library, they had a multicam setup like this, and you know, amazing studio gear, and it was absolutely unaffordable for someone like me to do that at the time. You could buy camcorders and they were very poor quality, and that's what we used to use, or the webcam on our Mac. And then suddenly DSLR cameras, not the mirrorless ones that we use now, but DSLR cameras became available with high quality lenses for reasonably affordable prices. And I remember going and buying my first camera and being like, wow, okay, suddenly this is incredible. And being able to shoot products, tuition products, and do YouTube videos with much higher quality, where you could have a really beautiful view down the neck and see what the fingers are doing. You could shoot, you know, the right hand only and show people what you were doing. And then suddenly the technology became affordable, like the Panasonic G7s and the GH2s and the GH4s. I don't know what you're using. Is it GH5s? Yeah. This stuff suddenly became really affordable comparatively, and you could buy 2 or 3 cameras, and you could buy lights, and you could have a studio where it was not a studio in the traditional sense of a musician, a recording studio. You could have a video studio in your house, and you could start producing products that had switchable camera angles and so on and so forth. And this was like incredible. This is what you have to do now. And the quality, you have to have 4K, you have to have really high quality bit rates. You've got to know what you're doing as a video editor. Well, none of that existed at the time. There weren't guitar players who knew how to edit videos. We had to figure this stuff out, you know, as everybody does now, but it didn't exist, you know. So we were releasing products that had these multiple camera angles in and getting really into gear. And of course, we're guitar players, so gear is like our thing. So suddenly we're not only interested in this, pedal boards and guitars and amps, now it's like camera gear. Okay, what lens have you got? What cameras do you use? So it became a big obsession, and that's actually where I spend most of my money these days, is on camera gear. I buy analog synths as well. That's my other, like, that's my other money sink, is analog synths.
There's no return after that,
No, I know,
man.
I'm fully aware. That's been an interesting journey. But camera gear as well. So now, like, I'm running 4 Sony A7 IIIs with Ninja, like for guitar players, so not into this, this will be really boring, but with Atomos Ninja recorders on top. All the lights, you know, it's quite a complicated setup with, you know, the Blackmagic switches and stuff, and all that kind of stuff for live streaming as well. And I think the real catalyst that pushed everybody into this was COVID, obviously, because suddenly everybody's wanting to produce video content. Even the guys who were really anti this at the time, you know, you're kind of old school, like older than me generation of guys who were like, this sucks, guitar players shouldn't be making videos, they should be playing live gigs. It's like, okay, well, suddenly we have to buy the gear and get into it. And now everybody does it. And it's become part of being a guitar player. But it was interesting going through that journey at the beginning and kind of like, you know, the technology not existing in an affordable way and suddenly it becoming mass market was really cool, actually. It's great. Yeah, I love it.
You said many times that guitar players that influenced you were Brett Garsett, Steve Vai, Alan Holdsworth, perhaps many others. But do you have a video influence? There was a YouTuber that made you want to look like their videos.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one that everybody goes on about from my generation was Peter McKinnon back in the day. So no guitar players, it was all the guys who were producing super high-end video production tutorials. So I have a few guys in that regard that I really like and I've learned a lot from. Gerald Undone is another one who's done some amazing tutorial videos on video production. And of course, at the time we were learning along the way, but now these guys have got these incredible tutorials that exist that show you how to go from like just literally a light bulb in your ceiling to cinema style production. Like you've got like the lights behind you and stuff and, you know, key lights and all that kind of thing. And you learn all of this stuff. It's all available now, which is absolutely killer. But yeah, back in the day, Peter McKinnon was the guy that everybody wanted their videos to look like him. I think he's still going, but he's not quite as famous as he was. But yeah, he was a big influence on me back in the day. And these days, there's loads of guys producing amazing quality videos. I mean, Paul David's videos are beautiful. Just the production on those, and they have been for years as well. Really, really amazing looking content. So it's something else as a guitar player that you can get into, you know, like shooting beautiful B-roll is one of my big things. Just getting the gimbal and like doing the slow motion B-roll shots, getting the lighting perfect. I love it.
Yeah.
It's awesome because it's a creative process with very tangible end results. So it's, you know, just as addictive as all of this stuff and the playing.
Because it's usually connected to selling products or promotion, one would never see it as art. But do you think there's an art part to it?
Yeah, of course, because if you take the sales bit out of the equation, I'm not producing beautiful looking B-roll to sell products, although that is the end result. I'm saying I'm producing beautiful B-roll. I'm not saying. I like to try and produce good looking B-roll because I enjoy it, because I've got the product in front of me, and that's the fun part for me. Because, you know, sitting and talking about another pedal or another amp or whatever, I mean, I don't do so many of those videos anymore, but I used to do lots of them. When I worked for the magazine, when I worked for Guitar Interactive magazine, you know, how many ways can you describe an electric guitar, you know? But you can shoot some beautiful looking B-roll of it with the lights behind and, you know, getting the shot just right. Just timing that slow motion just right. It feeds the creative juices of the brain. So it is art. I mean, of course, in fact, you know, that kind of art has existed for over a century now with cinematography. You know, there's a reason why the guy behind the camera pointing it beautifully at certain subjects and getting the lighting right. This is absolute art, you know, and it's all about sales. Films are all about sales. It's all about selling the art, you know, the product.
The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, they got paid for that.
Exactly, exactly.
And it was art.
Yeah, it feeds the kind of the artistic soul, if you like. You know, it feels good to make something look nice. So I love it. I absolutely love it, and I'm addicted to technology anyway. So it feeds that part of my brain as well.
I met Matteo Mancuso at Guitar Summit, and I asked him a question, and I'm going to make the same question
Okay,
for you.
cool.
You're one of the guys who gets in the comment section of YouTube, after seeing this, I want to quit playing. Because you're so good that they make them feel like there's no sense. What would you say to those people?
Well, first of all, that feeling never goes away. Maybe not as intense as they might be feeling it, but that feeling always, like I get that feeling. It doesn't matter where you are in your journey. There are people, like when I watch Wayne Krantz, for example, or I watched Alan Holdsworth live, or when I was just in Italy with Greg Howe and I watched Greg Howe play, or when I go to New York and see Jonathan Kreisberg play, some of these insane jazz guitar players, and you realize it's not a level playing field. I'll never be that guy. I remember having a very painful moment in my career where I realized I'm never going to be a New York jazz guy. It's just not going to happen. That was what I wanted to do for years. But then you just continue on the journey and you find your voice, you find your sound, and eventually that's going to happen because you are a unique amalgamation of the influences that you have. Nobody else has those specific set of influences and those specific set of experiences that you do. So you always have something to say. And, you know, music is there's a reason why, this is a quote actually I'm stealing from a friend of mine, a guy called John Wheatcroft, a great guitar player, but there's a reason they call it playing music. It's not working music, it's meant to be fun, it's meant to be enjoyable. It doesn't have to always feel like a slog or like you've got to do more practice, just enjoy yourself. Remember the reason why you picked the instrument up in the first place and you'll be absolutely fine. The times in my life, and I've had a few of them where I've just felt like putting this down forever, which is what they're describing. You know, I've just felt this is too hard, I'm not making enough progress, I'm not enjoying it anymore. You have to try and remember why you picked up the guitar in the first place, what you enjoyed about it, and try and recreate that feeling. And that might be discovering new music, it might be, you know, moving away from shred guitar or whatever it is you're doing, trying to learn to play standards in all 12 keys. Go somewhere else for a while, experience something else in music and find that love again, and you'll be absolutely fine. It's not a competition, it's not a sport, it's a team thing. It's meant to be, you're meant to enjoy it with other people or just with yourself. It's meant to be fun, it's meant to be played, you know. Don't take it too seriously.
That's a nice advice.
Cool.
Today we have Tom Quayle, we have Tosin Abasi, we have Tim Henson from Polyphia, we have Matteo Mancuso. And do you believe that guitar technique is going forward every day higher, or it is just that we forget people like Brett Garsett, like Alan Holdsworth? What do you think about that?
I mean, technique is changing, so the approach, you know, like the double thumping thing, Tosin has brought loads of new techniques to the table, so the sound is different. I don't think the technical level is necessarily changing because I've been lucky enough to see all my heroes play in front of me in person. I don't mean on stage, but literally like this in front of me. And when you see these guys, you know, like I was in Italy with Greg Howe earlier in the year, and it's extraordinary what he can do on the instrument. And there are very few people who can do that to that level. And then I was, in Nashville with Brent Mason, Andy Wood, Ariel Posen, some of these guys. And these are all guys of my generation, and their technical level is absolutely insane. So when you take someone like Matteo Mancuso, or you take Tim from Polyphia, their technique is different, but I think basically it's an evolution, not necessarily upwards, but across, sideways. I think guitar is now at the point where the technical level doesn't need to go higher, it just needs to change in terms of its direction. Because the technical level of electric guitar has been extraordinary since the 80s, like truly extraordinary, So it's a sideways evolution, I think, rather than just an upwards trajectory. But I could be proven wrong. There might be somebody who literally just transforms the instrument entirely that comes along, who knows? I mean, with the generation that are online now, the level is so insane at such a young age. I mean, that's the thing. Younger guitar players have much higher technique than I think people did when I was younger, as a starting point. You see these kids who they can shred like crazy at the age of 7,
There's the dedication, but also the access to the
That's the
content.
thing. The access is just always there. If you want to see, when I was a kid, the only way I could watch someone like Greg Howe play, well, I couldn't really watch them play. The only access I had to them was through either magazines where transcriptions had been done and I could listen to them, but you couldn't see them play, or if you were lucky enough to see them live, or you could get the very expensive VHS tapes that were around at the time. And I had a few of those, but you could never get to see them play live in person. It was very rare. I always liken this to when I was younger, those guys were like Marvel superheroes. You weren't actually sure if they existed or not. It's like, are they just like legendary? Is this real?
Just a few pictures of
Yeah,
them?
it's bizarre, yeah.
Just one VHS, perhaps?
Exactly. Like Alan Holdsworth was like that for me up until the age of about 29. I was lucky enough to see him play live once, but I'd never seen him in person. I didn't go to trade shows at that time. You never got to see these people except on the odd video. And, it was just an incredible experience to see him live and go, oh my God, he is real. And he does sound like that. That's just crazy. So that was my experience growing up. But now they've got access to all of these guys, and you can message them and have lessons with them, for crying out loud. Like one-on-one lessons with an incredible quality video, seeing exactly what they're doing. So it's amazing, absolutely incredible.
You see, in Spain, people around 40s have the impression that young people are not very interested in guitar. Does that feel the same in UK?
No.
Okay.
No, definitely not. To give you an example, I did a clinic with Martin at a place called Scan, which is in Bolton in the UK, which is not a particularly well-off area. It's in the north, near Manchester. There's not a huge amount of money there, so like buying a guitar for the kid is not necessarily an easy thing to do. And there were 2 or 3 kids there who played incredibly well. They had the long hair, they had like the jacket with all the badges on, they were rocking a great looking guitar, and they sounded awesome. So there are a lot of kids who are interested in guitar these days. And of course, when they get interested in guitar, they're all doing the whole thing now. They're all posting on social media at the age of 7, like getting a following at the age of 7 with their crazy guitar playing. It's amazing, it's absolutely awesome.
Okay, we get to the end of the interview, but I would like to end with one question, which is, give us an advice for music and another advice for business.
So for the music thing, I'm going to go back to what I said before, which is always try to remember why you're doing what you're doing, what pushed you into playing guitar in the first place, why you love it. Because when you do this, and this sort of relates to the business side of things as well, so maybe this dovetails into that. When it starts to become your job, and when you start making money from it, it doesn't matter whether you're playing in a function band or whether you're getting big on Instagram or you are selling products or you're working for a company producing videos or whatever it is you're doing. When it becomes a job, it's easy to forget why you started doing it in the first place, because you've now got to earn money from it. There's pressure, so on and so forth. It's like the old analogy of if you work in an ice cream van or an ice cream shop, you no longer want to eat ice cream, even though you loved it when you first started. You've got to remember why you started doing it in the first place and always have that as the reason for why you do what you do. Otherwise, it's too easy to become burnt out and stop doing it and so on and so forth. So that's really the thing, is to keep that, remember what drove you to do this in the first place and what you loved about it, and always keep that close to you, and you'll be fine.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Everything you explained was so interesting.
Cool.
Honestly.
Thank you.
Guitarristas, ya veis la suerte que tenemos. Tom Quayle aquí con nosotros. Seguidnos si queréis ver más contenido como este, aunque este era muy bueno, la verdad. O sea que va a ser difícil igualarlo. Chicos, muchísimas gracias por estar ahí y hasta la próxima.
Thank you.